My name is Jonah Rourke, and I'm 42 years old. For most of my adult life, I believed that hard work, integrity, and loyalty to family were the pillars that held everything together. I spent 20 years building myself into everything my father, Charles Rourke, demanded. Disciplined, sober, and worthy of inheriting the logistics empire he'd built from nothing in Chicago. Rourke Freight Solutions wasn't just a company. It was our legacy, moving cargo across the Midwest with a reputation for reliability that took decades to establish. But here's what I learned the hard way. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty, and sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who'll destroy you without hesitation. If you enjoy stories of cold-blooded revenge and gripping plot twists, like this video and subscribe to the channel now. There are brand new unreleased stories here every day, each one more intense than the last. My father always had a favorite, and it wasn't me. Brandon, my younger brother by 7 years, could do no wrong in Charles's eyes. While I was pulling 16-hour days learning every aspect of the business, from DOT regulations to fleet maintenance schedules, Brandon was out burning through trust fund money at River North bars, crashing company vehicles, and treating our Chicago headquarters like his personal playground. I remember one particular incident in 2018 when Brandon totaled a brand new Kenworth truck during what he called a client meeting in Milwaukee. The truck was worth $190,000, and the client meeting turned out to be a weekend gambling trip to the Potawatomi Casino. Instead of consequences, my father covered the insurance claim and gave Brandon a promotion to vice president of operations. "Boys will be boys," Charles would say whenever I brought up Brandon's reckless behavior. "He'll grow out of it." But Brandon never grew out of anything. If anything, he got worse as the company grew more successful. By 2020, we were handling contracts worth millions, moving everything from automotive parts for Ford's Chicago assembly plant to consumer goods for major retailers throughout Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana. The bigger we got, the more opportunities Brandon found to cut corners and bend rules. I should have seen the warning signs earlier. The discrepancies in fuel receipts, the mysterious overtime charges that never matched our driver logs, the way Brandon would deflect questions about certain contracts with jokes or by changing the subject entirely. But I trusted that my father would handle it. I believed that family meant something. That trust almost destroyed me. In March 2022, everything came crashing down. The FBI's Chicago Financial Crimes Division raided our offices on West Lake Street at 6 in the morning. Federal agents seized computers, filing cabinets, and boxes of financial records, while employees watched in shock from the parking lot. The warrant mentioned fraud, embezzlement, and falsification of federal transportation documents. The scope of Brandon's crimes was staggering. Over 4 years, he'd created ghost contracts with fake companies, billing clients for services never provided. He'd manipulated weight certificates to avoid federal taxes, potentially putting drivers and other motorists at risk. The stolen money, nearly $6 million, had been funneled through a series of shell companies and offshore accounts. But here's the part that still takes my breath away. When the investigators started asking questions, my father didn't hesitate for a second to throw me under the bus. Within 48 hours of the FBI raid, my father had crafted a narrative that painted me as the mastermind behind everything. He told investigators that I'd been acting alone, driven by greed and resentment over not being named CEO soon enough. According to Charles, I'd manipulated Brandon, poor, naive Brandon, into signing documents he didn't understand. The evidence against me was overwhelming, and I couldn't figure out how. Digital signatures on fraudulent contracts that looked exactly like mine. Bank account records, showing transfers to accounts allegedly under my control. Even surveillance footage from our office building that seemed to show me working late on nights when suspicious transactions occurred. "I'm sorry, son," my father said when he visited me at the Cook County Jail, where I was being held on $750,000 bail. "But the evidence speaks for itself. Maybe this will teach you that shortcuts never pay off in the long run." I stared at him through that plexiglass partition, searching his face for any sign that he knew I was innocent, any hint that he was fighting for me behind the scenes. but all I saw was disappointment and what looked like genuine conviction that I was guilty. Brandon never visited me once during the 5 months I spent in county lockup waiting for trial. My court-appointed attorney, an overworked public defender named Patricia Wilson, was handling 63 other cases. She had maybe 20 minutes to spend on my defense each week. The forensic evidence is pretty damning, she told me during one of our brief meetings. Your best bet is to take a plea deal. The prosecutor's offering 12 years if you cooperate and help them recover the missing funds. I don't know where the funds are because I didn't steal them, I said for the 100th time. Look, Mr. Rourke, I've been doing this for 15 years. Everyone claims they're innocent. But digital evidence doesn't lie. Your signatures are on these documents. But I knew something was wrong. I'd worked in that office for 2 decades. I knew every system, every procedure, every security protocol. Some of the transactions supposedly happened during times when I was provably elsewhere. At DOT compliance meetings in Springfield, at logistics conferences in Milwaukee, visiting our satellite offices in Indianapolis. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. My cellmate at Cook County was a guy named Tommy Castellanos, a forensic accountant who'd been caught embezzling from his own firm. Tommy had worked for some of Chicago's biggest accounting firms before his gambling addiction got the better of him. Your dad hired some serious talent to frame you, Tommy said one night as we lay on our bunks. This isn't amateur hour. The digital forensics, the paper trail, the timing. Someone spent real money to make this bulletproof. What do you mean? I asked. I mean, whoever did this understands federal banking regulations, digital signature protocols, and corporate law. They knew exactly how to create evidence that would hold up in court. Your typical fraudster can't pull this off. This took planning, resources, and inside knowledge of your company's systems. Tommy helped me understand what to look for. He explained how digital signatures could be replicated, how timestamps could be manipulated, and how financial records could be altered retroactively. More importantly, he told me about a forensic accountant named Sarah Matthews in downtown Chicago, who specialized in uncovering sophisticated financial crimes. She's expensive, Tommy said, but if anyone can prove you were framed, it's her. The problem was money. My assets had been frozen as part of the federal investigation. My father had cut off all financial support, claiming he couldn't be seen as helping a suspected criminal. I was broke, facing a life sentence, and completely alone. That's when I made a decision that probably saved my life. Instead of taking the plea deal, I fired Patricia Wilson and decided to represent myself. I used the Cook County Law Library to study every aspect of my case, spending 18 hours a day reading federal statutes, reviewing case precedents, and learning about digital forensics. I wasn't trying to become a lawyer. I was trying to buy time while I figured out how to afford Sarah Matthews' services. More importantly, I was starting to piece together the timeline of my father's betrayal, and it went back much further than I'd realized. The more I studied the evidence against me, the more patterns I began to recognize. The fake contracts weren't random. They followed the same format as legitimate agreements I'd drafted years earlier. The shell companies had addresses that corresponded to properties my father owned through various LLCs. Even the bank account supposedly under my control had been opened, using personal information that only family members would have access to. My father hadn't just failed to protect me. He'd actively participated in destroying me to save Brandon, and he'd been planning it for years. My trial began in August 2022. I walked into that federal courthouse on South Dearborn Street, knowing I was fighting for my life with nothing but the legal knowledge I'd crammed into my head over 5 months in jail. The prosecutor, Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Rodriguez, had a reputation for never losing white-collar crime cases. He laid out the evidence against me like he was assembling a jigsaw puzzle, each piece fitting perfectly into place. But I'd spent those months in county lockup studying every document, every transaction, every digital signature, and I'd found something the investigators missed. During cross-examination of the FBI's computer forensics expert, I asked a simple question. Agent Morrison, Can you tell the court what time zone was used to timestamp the digital signatures on exhibits 47 through 52? Eastern Standard Time, she replied confidently. And what time zone does our Chicago office operate in? Central Standard Time. So according to your analysis, I was supposedly signing fraudulent contracts at 2 in the morning Chicago time on January 23, 2022. But according to my company's keycard access logs, which are Exhibit 93 in evidence, I badged out of the building at 6:30 p.m. that day. Are you suggesting I drove back to the office at midnight to commit fraud? Agent Morrison hesitated. It's possible the timestamps were affected by server synchronization issues. Possible, I said. But wouldn't a thorough investigation have verified these timestamps against other system logs before concluding they were accurate? That was the first crack in their case. Over the next 3 days, I found 17 more inconsistencies. Signatures allegedly created on days when I was attending mandatory DOT safety seminars in Springfield. Bank transfers that happened during times when surveillance footage showed me in meetings with legitimate clients. Digital footprints that made no logical sense when examined closely. The jury deliberated for 8 hours and found me not guilty on all charges. But being acquitted isn't the same as being vindicated. The damage to my reputation was catastrophic. Rourke Freight Solutions had hemorrhaged clients during the investigation. Industry contacts who'd known me for 20 years wouldn't return my calls. The Chicago logistics community is tight-knit, and the whispers followed me everywhere. Jonah Rourke got off on a technicality, but everyone knows he was guilty. My father publicly supported the jury's decision while privately telling anyone who'd listened that the justice system had failed. Sometimes guilty people go free, he told the Chicago Tribune. But Rourke Freight Solutions will rebuild without him. We can't afford to have our reputation tainted by association. Brandon was promoted to CEO 3 weeks after my acquittal. That's when I realized my father's betrayal went beyond protecting his favorite son. He'd orchestrated my destruction to permanently remove me from the company succession. With me gone and discredited, Brandon would inherit everything without having to prove himself worthy. I could have walked away, started over somewhere else, maybe Phoenix or Denver, where the Rourke name didn't carry the stench of scandal. But I'd spent 5 months in a jail cell learning federal law, and I wasn't done using that knowledge. I contacted Sarah Matthews the week after my acquittal. Her firm, Matthews & Associates Forensic Accounting, occupied a corner office on the 32nd floor of the Willis Tower. Sarah was in her late 30s, a former FBI financial crimes investigator who'd gone private after prosecuting some of Chicago's biggest corporate fraud cases. I followed your trial, she said during our first meeting. You did impressive work representing yourself, but proving innocence in criminal court is different from proving a civil conspiracy. For that, we'll need to show not just that you were framed, but who framed you and how they did it. How much will that cost? I asked. My retainer is $50,000. A full forensic investigation could run another $100,000, depending on what we find. I'd lost everything in the federal asset seizure. My condo in Lincoln Park, my BMW, my investment accounts, all frozen and later liquidated to pay legal fees. But I had one asset my father didn't know about. A safety deposit box containing $200,000 in cash that I'd been saving to buy my own trucking company before everything fell apart. Let's get started, I told Sarah. Her investigation took 10 months and confirmed what I'd suspected in that Cook County jail cell. The conspiracy involved not just my father and Brandon, but also the company's IT director, David Walsh, and our longtime accountant, Margaret Flynn. They'd used their access to company systems to create a digital paper trail that made me look guilty while hiding Brandon's actual crimes. The fake contracts were generated using templates from legitimate deals I'd negotiated, with my digital signature replicated using software David Walsh had purchased through a shell company. The bank accounts were opened using my social security number and copies of documents from my personnel file. Even the surveillance footage had been edited to show me in the office during times when I was actually elsewhere. This wasn't a crime of opportunity, Sarah explained as she walked me through her findings. This was a coordinated effort that took years to plan and execute. Your father didn't just choose to protect Brandon when the FBI investigation started. He orchestrated Brandon's crimes in a way that would implicate you from the beginning. The financial trail revealed the full scope of the theft. Brandon hadn't stolen $6 million. He'd stolen almost $15 million over 4 years. The missing $9 million had been funneled through a network of offshore accounts controlled by Charles, who'd been using company funds to finance real estate investments in Florida and Arizona. Your father used you as a scapegoat to cover his own crimes, Sarah said. Brandon was just the front man. Charles was the real mastermind. Armed with Sarah's forensic analysis, I hired the best civil litigation firm in Chicago, Kellerman, Brooks & Associates. Senior partner James Kellerman had successfully sued everyone from Fortune 500 companies to city governments. His contingency fee was 40% of any settlement or judgment, but he guaranteed that Rourke Freight Solutions would pay dearly for what they'd done to me. We filed 3 separate lawsuits in July 2023. The first was a civil suit against the company for wrongful termination, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The second targeted my father and Brandon personally for conspiracy, fraud, and perjury. The third was a whistleblower action under the False Claims Act, since some of the fraudulent contracts involved federal transportation funds. The discovery process was brutal for them. Court orders forced the company to turn over 5 years of financial records, email communications, and system logs. Depositions revealed the extent of David Walsh and Margaret Flynn's involvement. Under oath, facing potential perjury charges, both of them flipped and provided detailed testimony about how the conspiracy was executed. By spring 2024, Charles and Brandon were facing federal criminal charges while simultaneously fighting my civil suits. The stress was destroying them. Charles developed stress-related heart problems and was hospitalized twice. Brandon started drinking heavily and crashed his Porsche into a light pole on Lakeshore Drive, resulting in a DUI arrest that made the Chicago Sun-Times. The company was hemorrhaging money paying legal fees while losing major contracts. FedEx terminated their relationship with Rourke Freight Solutions, citing reliability concerns. UPS followed suit 2 weeks later. By fall 2024, the company that had taken my father 30 years to build was on the verge of bankruptcy. The final blow came in November 2024, when a federal grand jury indicted both Charles and Brandon on multiple felony charges. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Northern District of Illinois announced the charges at a press conference covered by every major news outlet in Chicago: conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, and perjury. Charles was facing up to 30 years in federal prison. Brandon was looking at 20, but I wasn't done yet. While they were fighting criminal charges and hemorrhaging money on legal fees, I was quietly positioning myself for the final phase of my plan. In January 2025, Rourke Freight Solutions filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. The company that had once been worth $40 million was now drowning in debt, legal judgments, and the collapse of their client base. During the bankruptcy proceedings, I made my move. Through a holding company I'd established called Midwest Transport Holdings, I began acquiring Rourke Freight's assets at auction. The federal bankruptcy court in Chicago's Dirksen Federal Building became my hunting ground. First, I bought their fleet of trucks at 60 cents on the dollar. 47 Kenworth tractors, 23 Freightliner trucks, and over 100 trailers, all purchased anonymously through intermediaries. Then I acquired their client contracts, their warehouse facilities in Joliet and Gary, Indiana, and even their DOT operating authority numbers. My father didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. By the time Charles figured out that Midwest Transport Holdings was me, I owned everything that had once been his life's work. The company name was gone, but I controlled every tangible asset that had made Rourke Freight Solutions valuable. The irony was perfect. While Charles and Brandon were awaiting sentencing, Charles ultimately received 22 years. Brandon received 16. I was rebuilding their empire under my own terms. I renamed the operation Midwest Logistics Solutions and hired back many of the drivers and warehouse workers who'd lost their jobs when the original company collapsed. But I made sure everyone knew the real story. During job interviews, I explained exactly why the company had failed and why I was the right person to rebuild it. Word spread quickly through Chicago's tight-knit logistics community. The drivers, the dock workers, the dispatchers, they all knew that Charles Rourke had betrayed his own son to protect a criminal. Within 8 months, Midwest Logistics Solutions had recovered most of the major contracts that Rourke Freight had lost. FedEx, UPS, and Amazon all signed new agreements with my company. Our revenue exceeded $10 million in our first year, nearly triple what the original company had been generating before the scandal. The civil lawsuits were settled in June 2025 for a total of $18 million. Charles's Florida condo, his Arizona ranch, and Brandon's Chicago penthouse were all liquidated to pay the judgment. Everything they'd bought with stolen money became mine through legal channels. I never visited them in prison. I never sent letters or responded to their attempts to contact me. The last communication I had with my father was a letter he sent from the Federal Correctional Institution in Pekin, Illinois, where he's serving his sentence. "I know you hate me," he wrote, "but I was trying to protect the family. Brandon made mistakes, but he's young. He could have learned from them and grown into a better man. You were always strong enough to survive anything. I thought you'd be fine." I threw the letter away without finishing it. The truth is, I don't hate Charles anymore. Hatred requires emotional investment, and I've learned to reserve my energy for more productive purposes. He made his choice when he decided that blood meant more than justice, that protecting his favorite was worth destroying his other son. Now he's living with the consequences of that choice in a federal prison cell. Brandon wrote to me once, asking for money to help with his appeal. I had my attorney send a brief response. Mr. Rourke has no relationship with Brandon Rourke and will not be providing any assistance. Both their appeals were denied. Today, Midwest Logistics Solutions employs over 200 people across Illinois, Wisconsin, and Indiana. We're profitable, growing, and built on a foundation of integrity that my father's company never had. Every contract we sign, every client relationship we build, every driver we hire knows they're working for someone who values honesty over favoritism. I've learned that family isn't just about shared blood. It's about shared values, mutual respect, and loyalty that goes both ways. The drivers who work for me now, the dispatchers who've been with me since the beginning, the warehouse supervisors who chose to trust me when no one else would, they're my real family. Sometimes I drive past the federal prison in Pekin when I'm traveling to our Springfield distribution center. I don't stop, but I think about the choices that brought us all to this point. Charles chose to protect a criminal's son at the expense of an innocent one. Brandon chose easy money over honest work. I chose to fight back instead of walking away. They're spending their best years behind bars while I'm building something better than what they destroyed. That's not revenge. That's justice. The logistics industry in Chicago is small enough that everyone knows the story now. When new clients ask about Midwest Logistics Solutions, they hear about the company that rose from the ashes of corruption, led by the man who was framed by his own family and came back stronger. My reputation isn't just clean, it's bulletproof. If you enjoyed this story, like this video and leave a comment telling me what you thought. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please subscribe and hit the notification bell to get alerts for new stories like this one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.